Okay, May 2025. Some really stunning news hit the tech world. Just imagine this. A company, a celebrated unicorn valued at over $1.3 billion,
Wow.
backed by giants like Microsoft, the Qatar Investment Authority. They raised over $450 million.
hmm
And then, almost overnight, poof, gone. Insolvency proceedings kicking off in 5 countries.
Just like that.
Yeah, we're talking about Builder.ai. How does a company with that kind of backing, that kind of grand vision just disappear?
It's a huge question.
So today, that's what we're doing. We're pulling back the curtain. We're diving deep into this stack of sources you shared, all the articles, the reports, the investigations that really lay out the story of Builder.ai.
Yeah, trying to piece it all together.
Exactly. Our mission here is to sift through it all, pull out those key bits of information you really need to understand what went down, why it matters, and, what lessons we can actually dig out from the rubble of this fallen AI giant. Think of this as your shortcut, getting you informed on one of the most dramatic tech stories we've seen in quite a while.
Yeah, definitely one for the books.
And look, if you're someone who really appreciates getting up to speed quickly on these complex topics, cutting through the noise to find those surprising details that make it all click and getting informed without feeling totally overwhelmed, well, then this deep dive is absolutely for you. So make sure you hit subscribe to the deep dive. It's honestly the best way to make sure you don't miss out on future explorations like this one. We promise we'll keep bringing you the essential insights from the topics you really care about.
Okay, let's get into it then. Where does the story start?
Right, so let's start at the beginning. The sources, they trace Builder.ai's journey back to what seemed like a really incredibly compelling vision.
Yeah.
And a founder who had a real knack for grabbing attention.
That vision. It was pretty catchy, wasn't it?
So the core idea, make building software as easy as ordering a pizza, all supposedly powered by AI.
And that timing was, well, perfect, really. Tapped right into growing hunger for no-code, low-code solutions. The promise was massive. Speed, they were claiming, what, up to 6 times faster?
Yeah, 6 times faster and 70% lower cost. That's what they claimed.
Huge numbers. And making software accessible to pretty much everyone, right? Especially smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, people without big tech teams.
Exactly. That narrative was just incredibly powerful. And the guy driving it was the founder, Sachin Dev. He really cultivated this image, didn't he? This tech visionary persona.
He even called himself the chief wizard.
The chief wizard. Yeah, you see his backstory highlighted everywhere in that early coverage. Building PCs when he was 14, creating some currency trading system for Deutsche Bank at 17.
Impressive stuff on paper. Degrees from Imperial College and MIT program.
And he even won the EY Entrepreneur of the Year UK award in 2023.
Right, and interestingly, he was also included in the EY World Entrepreneur of the Year class of 2024, which, kind of ironically, was announced just as things were really starting to unravel for the company.
Wow. And his claimed past successes, like selling his cloud company, Niveo, reportedly for nearly $100 million. And that personal story about struggling to build his own app, Shodo, which supposedly sparked the whole Builder.ai idea, it all built up this really strong, entrepreneurial image.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of a startup's early momentum, its ability to raise serious cash, is purely based on the founder's narrative, their charisma, versus the actual tech underneath.
Yeah, that's a good question.
In this case, that personal brand seems like it was a huge asset right at the start. The sources mentioned Saurabh Dut was a co-founder too, but his role was apparently more advisory later on, rooted in a friendship with Degal.
Right, and that detail becomes relevant later, doesn't it, with some of the financial stuff?
Exactly.
So that combination, the exciting vision, the magnetic founder, it definitely attracted serious money. The sources lay out this funding journey, and it looks pretty impressive on paper. Ultimately, what, over $450 million total?
Yeah, over $450 million. You saw those big rounds stacking up. Series A, $29.5 million back in 2018. Series B, $65.5 million in 2021. Then Series C, $100 million in 2022, led by Insight Partners.
Heavy hitters.
Absolutely. And then the really massive one, Series D, in May 2023.
Yeah.
$250 million, led by the Qatar Investment Authority, QIA, with Microsoft also coming in strategically.
And that's the round that propelled them to that unicorn status, right? Reportedly valued somewhere between $1 billion and $1.5 billion.
That's the one. Unicorn status achieved.
And, I mean, when you get names like Microsoft and a major sovereign wealth fund like QIA backing you, That's a huge stamp of credibility, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It creates this powerful perception of validation.
Mhm.
And you have to ask, right, if maybe that made subsequent investors or maybe even those big names themselves potentially a bit less rigorous in their due diligence down the line.
Interesting point.
It seems like they were really drawn in by that founder's story, the irresistible promise of AI,
Hmm.
these headline growth figures numbers that, well, as we're going to see, were very heavily questioned later. It was peak AI hype cycle.
Mhm.
You know, this company looked like it ticked all the right boxes.
Okay, so we've got the compelling rise, the big names involved. Now, here's where the story from the sources really takes a sharp turn. It starts painting this really stark contrast between the dazzling marketing and what was allegedly going on with Builder.ai's actual core technology.
Yeah, the marketing was just relentless on the AI angle. They even had Natasha, right,
Yeah.
pitched as the world's first AI product manager or AI assistant, supposedly guiding users through building their apps.
Right, I remember seeing that.
It was all about this AI-powered composable software platform, an AI-powered software assembly line using code building blocks,
Yeah.
promising you could build complex apps without writing a single line of code.
It sounded like the dream, didn't it? Perfectly aligned with that AI narrative everyone really wanted to believe in, made something super complex sound, well, simple.
Automated.
But then you look back, way back in 2019, actually long before the collapse, the Wall Street Journal published this expose based on talking to former employees, and it really threw cold water on that whole AI claim.
319.
Eh,
That early.
Yeah. The headline itself was pretty blunt, all engineer, no AI.
Wow. Okay, so what was the core accusation there, according to the sources?
Well, the main allegation was that the heavy lifting, right, the actual code generation, putting the pieces together, it wasn't being done by some sophisticated AI like they were suggesting.
So who was doing it?
It was allegedly being done by human engineers, mostly based in India, apparently, just following scripts and workflows.
Okay, so not really AI-powered in the way the marketing made it sound.
Not according to those allegations, no. And what's striking is just how early these questions popped up. There was a former chief business officer, Robert Holtheim, who even filed a lawsuit around that same time, 2019. It's a lawsuit.
Yeah, explicitly alleging the company was misrepresenting its AI capabilities and had, quote, barely begun to develop meaningful automation.
And there's that quote attributed to Dougal himself in the sources, reportedly responding to those early claims. It's pretty eye-opening.
Which one? The exaggeration one.
Yeah. Every startup exaggerates to get funding. It's the money that allows us to develop the technology.
Right. If that quote is accurate, I mean, it suggests a mindset right from the get-go that, prioritizing the funding, the narrative, even through exaggeration, was maybe seen as acceptable, with this idea that the tech could just catch up later. And later testimonies from employees, especially after the collapse, reportedly just reinforced those early concerns. Insiders claim there really wasn't a functional AI backend doing what was marketed.
So the core capabilities weren't there.
They said key things you'd expect, like natural language processing actually generating code or autonomous system design, just absent. They described it more like manual work done by less expensive human developers, following pretty rigid scripted processes, which was then kind of dressed up to look like automation.
Dressed up how?
Well, some reportedly went as far as calling the AI basically 1950s-style decision tree logic, just with a modern-looking interface slapped on top.
So customers, potentially paying premium prices for what they thought was cutting-edge AI, were allegedly getting outsourced manual coding instead.
That's what the sources allege was happening under the hood for a lot of the core service. Now, they do note the company probably used some basic machine learning for certain things, like maybe estimating costs or managing workflows.
Okay.
But it seems it was nowhere near autonomously generating software code, which was really central to that whole software assembly line promise they were selling.
Which brings us straight to that term AI washing, right? The sources use that explicitly.
Yes, they do. Many observers pointed to Builder.ai as a textbook example of AI washing.
Can you just quickly define that for us?
Sure. It's basically promoting something as being significantly AI-powered, especially to attract investment and customers in a market that's hyped up about AI.
Right.
When the reality, the actual technology, doesn't really match those claims, And in Builder.ai's case, it wasn't just seen as marketing spin. It was allegedly a fundamental misrepresentation of their core product and capabilities, sort of
Oh.
the lie underpinning the whole business model they were pitching to investors.
Okay, so we have this alleged AI Mirage on the tech side, but the sources also dig into some deeply concerning patterns of, well, alleged financial deception and mismanagement, stuff that seemingly helped prop up this whole illusion.
Right, and this is where the story really shifts towards potential fraud. A huge factor the sources point to was dramatically overstated revenues. Things apparently started looking shaky early in 2025 when they had to cut their forecasts, but it was after the CEO change in March 2025 that the true scale of the problem reportedly started coming out.
And the numbers cited in the sources, they're just staggering, aren't they? Sales projections for late 2024 apparently got slashed by 25%.
Yeah.
Then the entire 2024 forecast plummeted 75%, from $220 million down to just $55 million.
75%, that's incredible.
And their reported 2023 revenue restated downwards from $180 million to only $45 million, according to several consistent reports mentioned in the sources.
I mean, these aren't minor adjustments, are they? These are colossal revisions. It points to this fundamental disconnect between what they were reporting externally and what was actually happening.
Had anyone raised concerns internally before this?
Apparently so. Former employees had alleged even earlier that sales were being overstated, maybe by over 20%. And some insider claims reported in the sources went even higher, suggesting inflation of 20% to maybe even 300% on certain deals. The internal investigation that kicked off under the new CEO reportedly started uncovering what were described as potentially bogus sales, particularly looking at reseller deals in the Middle East, raising questions about whether some of these transactions were even real.
And then there's perhaps the most serious allegation detailed in the sources, this multi-year round-tripping scheme involving Verse Innovation, a big Indian social media company.
Yes, round tripping. It's a classic and deeply deceptive business practice.
How does it work, basically?
Essentially, it involves two companies billing each other, often for services that are either massively overvalued or maybe not even rendered at all. The goal is to create this false appearance of legitimate revenue and business activity flowing between them.
Okay.
The sources claim this happened between Builder.ai and Verse Innovation, possibly from 2021 to 2024, and potentially involving nearly $60 million in this kind of reciprocal billing.
60 million.
Yeah, allegedly done specifically to artificially inflate Builder.ai's reported revenue figures, making them look much bigger and healthier to investors.
That is an incredibly specific and serious claim. The sources also mention personal ties between the founders of the two companies, right? Which adds another layer.
It does add another layer of scrutiny. Now, it's really crucial to note here that Verse Innovation has strongly denied these allegations. They've stated they are baseless and false, and that they didn't pay for or bill for services they didn't actually receive or provide.
Okay, so they deny it flat out.
Flat out denial. But the allegations themselves, as reported across multiple sources, point towards the possibility of systemic financial manipulation.
Beyond the revenue issues, were there other red flags? What about auditing and governance?
Yeah, concerns were raised there too. The sources noted that for its UK accounts, Builder.ai reportedly used an accountant who had previous links to the founder, which raises questions about independence.
Right.
And various subsidiaries allegedly cycled through multiple quite small audit firms pretty quickly. One of those firms, interestingly, had also audited the collapsed crypto fund 3 Arrows Capital.
Oof. That doesn't sound great.
No. So for you, if you're looking at a company from the outside, maybe as an investor, maybe a business partner, who is auditing them is such a critical question.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have solid independent credentials? Are they changing auditors frequently? These can be significant red flags. Now, the sources did note Builder.ai eventually brought in Big Four auditors.
Okay, so they did get bigger auditors eventually.
Yes, but it seems like this happened quite late in the game, probably under pressure from investors or lenders, and clearly it wasn't enough to fix the underlying issues before things imploded.
And Verse's auditors, any flags there?
Interestingly, the sources point out that Verse Innovation's own auditor, Deloitte, while they did sign off on Verse's accounts, they also apparently flagged what they termed material weaknesses in Verse's internal controls.
Material weaknesses. That sounds serious.
It can be, although Verse apparently described these as fairly common process issues that they were actively working to address.
Okay. And finally, the sources also briefly touch on some other separate legal issues involving the founders related to the Videocon group in India.
Yeah, that seemed to surface during Builder.ai's later distress. They denied any wrongdoing in those past matters, but it just added to this complex backdrop of scrutiny surrounding the leadership.
So when you put it all together, the alleged misrepresentation of the core tech, these very serious allegations of financial irregularities, it really paints a picture of a company built on incredibly shaky ground, doesn't it?
It really does. The intense pressure to project success, to keep that funding flowing, may be fueled by that initial AI narrative and the need to hit those investor expectations, seems to have allegedly pushed the company down this path of deception.
Which brings us inevitably to the unraveling. The sources detail this really rapid descent. Kicked off late 2024, and it all came crashing down in May 2025.
Right. In October 2024, they secured a $50 million debt facility.
$50 million in debt.
Yeah, and this was a really critical moment because the sources strongly suggest this debt was likely approved based on those very financial forecasts that were, according to the later revelations, massively overstated.
So they borrowed money based on numbers that weren't real.
Allegedly, yes. And taking on significant debt like that meant agreeing to really tight covenants. These are basically strict promises about the company's financial performance, promises they would almost certainly fail to meet once the true lower revenue numbers came out.
And that failure happened fast. Early 2025 brings those huge revenue restatements we discussed, forecasts slashed by up to 75%.
Bang. That news just absolutely hammered investor and creditor confidence. It's the moment the alleged house of cards started to visibly, seriously wobble.
Then, February 2025, founder Sachin Dev Duggal steps down as CEO. He's replaced by Manpreet Rashia, who came over from one of the investors, Jungle Ventures.
That's a classic sign of deep trouble, isn't it? Investors bringing in their own person, a turnaround specialist, to try and regain control, though Duggal did stay on the board and kept his chief wizard title.
Right. And they tried some desperate measures after that.
Oh yeah. Textbook moves for a company in crisis. In March 2025, they somehow managed to raise an emergency $75 million in rescue financing from their existing investors, probably under intense pressure.
75 million more. Wow. And at the same time, massive layoffs. About 35% of the global staff, roughly 270 employees, were let go, drastically slashing operating expenses, trying to stem the bleeding, reportedly cutting quarterly costs from $40 million down to about $21 million.
Just huge cuts, but it wasn't enough.
Apparently not. Because in early to mid-May 2025, the senior lenders, the ones who provided that $50 million debt, led by Viola Credit, they reportedly declared default.
Why? What triggered the default?
The sources point to technical covenant breaches, which almost certainly means those huge revenue restatements finally showed the company hadn't met the financial targets they promised when they took on the debt.
So they broke the terms of the loan.
Exactly. And once those covenants are broken, the lenders have very powerful rights to act, basically to protect their investment. The company is legally in default.
And act they did. The sources report the lenders just swept, what was it, over $40 million? Some reports say $37 million, straight out of Builder.ai's bank accounts. Yeah, think about that. Just seized it and restricted access to most of whatever cash was left.
Leaving them with how much?
Reportedly, only about $5 million in cash left on hand. And critically, a lot of that $5 million was apparently stuck in Indian bank accounts, making it inaccessible for paying global salaries due to cross-border banking restrictions.
So, no cash. Can't pay employees, can't run the business globally.
Pretty much. CEO Manpreet Rashia reportedly had the awful task of informing employees the company was effectively insolvent. Couldn't meet its obligations.
And then came the official announcement.
Yep. Formal announcement of insolvency proceedings, appointing administrators to take over the wreckage. And this rapid collapse also meant defaulting on other major debts, like that carefully negotiated payment plan for $88 million they owed AWS.
Wow, $88 million to AWS.
Yeah, where they had apparently secured a 50% discount previously. And also owing Microsoft about $30 million.
Just a cascade of defaults.
It's incredibly swift and brutal, that chain of events. The restatements hit, confidence evaporates, covenants are breached, the cash gets seized. It shows just how quickly a company, especially one allegedly built on shaky foundations, can crumble once trust and accurate financials disappear.
Did the CEO blame the lenders?
Well, CEO Rashia's leaked memo to employees reportedly did blame the lenders for taking unexpected and irreversible action, suggesting they went back on verbal assurances. But ultimately, the lenders were acting within their legal rights, triggered directly by the company's own prior financial misrepresentations that led to the covenant breach.
So the collapse happened. What were the immediate consequences? Who got hurt the most?
Well, the fallout was immediate and severe for pretty much everyone involved. First and foremost, the employees. Hundreds of people across the globe lost their jobs instantly.
Right.
Yeah. And adding insult to injury, many were reportedly left without their final paychecks because the company's cash was either seized by lenders or stuck in those inaccessible accounts. A huge human cost right there.
That's awful.
And for you, listening, if you happen to be working for a startup, understanding these potential warning signs,
Yeah.
the rapid layoffs, the funding struggles, sudden leadership changes, it's just absolutely crucial for your own financial security.
Okay, employees hit hard. What about the customers? The businesses using Builder.ai?
They were left in crisis mode too.
Huh.
Businesses ranging from small entrepreneurs right up to potentially larger names mentioned in their past case studies, like the BBC or Mintra.
Right.
Anyone relying on Builder.ai for building or maintaining the apps was suddenly facing incomplete projects, potentially non-functional software, data access issues, and zero support. Huge disruption and potentially significant cost to try and salvage things or rebuild completely from scratch.
Another harsh reality.
And it really highlights the risk, doesn't it, of relying entirely on a single vendor, especially a fast-growing startup that might be burning through cash. The sources actually mentioned software escrow as a potential safeguard here.
Software escrow.
Yeah, where a neutral third party holds a copy of the software source code. If the vendor goes bust, the customer can potentially have access to the code, keep things running, or transition elsewhere. It's something you, as a customer, might consider demanding in contracts with critical vendors.
Good tip. And then the investors, those big names.
Microsoft, QIA, Insight Partners,
Hmm.
all those backers, they saw over $450 million just evaporate, gone.
Wow.
And beyond the massive financial loss, there's definite reputational damage. And some very serious questions being asked, both internally and externally, about their due diligence process, especially given those really early warning signs back in 2019.
Yeah, you have to wonder.
It raises that fundamental question for these sophisticated investors. Were those red flags genuinely missed? Or were they perhaps acknowledged but maybe downplayed, ignored, in the intense rush to get a piece of a hyped AI deal to back a potential unicorn? It's a tough question they'll likely be asking
Is
themselves.
an illegal fallout? Is that just beginning?
Oh, it seems like the legal storm is just starting to gather. Weeks before the insolvency was even formally announced, the sources report the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York issued a subpoena to the company.
The SDNY. That's serious.
Extremely serious. It signals a formal criminal investigation is underway into potential financial misreporting. The sources noted the company's general counsel then instructed employees to preserve all documents, which is standard procedure when facing this kind of federal inquiry.
And the fact it's a U.S. office involved.
It suggests the alleged misconduct might involve U.S. investors or have crossed international borders in significant ways that fall under U.S. jurisdiction.
And internally, what was happening before the collapse?
Well, under the new CEO, Manpreet Rashia, they'd already started their own internal investigation into those revenue irregularities and the alleged bogus sales, particularly in the Middle East.
Yeah.
The sources also reported that whistleblowers had come forward. And there were even allegations that some employees who tried to raise concerns internally about the company's practices may have faced repercussions, including potentially being laid off.
That sounds like a toxic culture, if true.
It's a critical detail, isn't it? A culture that suppresses internal dissent or pushes back against employees raising legitimate red flags. And that's a massive warning sign itself about the health and integrity of any organization. It suggests a desire to keep problems hidden rather than actually addressing them.
Have the key players said much since the collapse? The investors, the founder.
The big investors like Microsoft and QIA have reportedly remained largely silent since the collapse and the serious allegations surfaced. Builder.ai's official statement was pretty vague, just citing historic challenges and past decisions.
Okay.
CEO Rashia's focus, at least in that leaked memo we mentioned, seemed to be primarily blaming the lender's actions for triggering the final collapse.
And Dougal, the founder.
Founder Sachin Dev Dougal offered a more seemingly contrite message on LinkedIn. He acknowledged the ongoing investigations into inflated sales numbers and round tripping, which is quite an admission, but he also added this sort of cryptic hint that the story is not done yet.
Intriguing. So what happens now to the company's assets?
Well, the immediate future for whatever's left of Builder.ai, the technology, the IP, customer contracts, maybe is now in the hands of the administrators and liquidators. Their job is basically to try and sell off anything of value to recoup as much money as possible for the creditors, the people the company owes money to.
Could the founder try and buy it back?
The sources mentioned there was some speculation about that, just speculation, mind you, that Dougal himself might try to buy back some assets, though obviously any assets would be hugely devalued by the scandal and the ongoing investigations.
Okay, so looking at this whole dramatic story, is Builder.ai just a unique, isolated failure? Or does it kind of echo other cautionary tales we've seen in the tech world? The sources definitely argue it's not unique.
Yet they draw some really striking comparisons. The parallels to Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes's blood testing company, are just hard to ignore, aren't they?
How so?
Well, both featured these extremely charismatic founders selling a really grand vision to fix a complex problem. Both face serious allegations of fundamentally misrepresenting their core technology. Theranos' machines famously didn't work. They were secretly using conventional methods. Builder.ai's AI was allegedly heavily reliant on human-powered manual labor disguised as automation.
Right.
Both attracted massive investment, billions in Theranos' case, hundreds of millions here, despite early red flags and whistleblower warnings, which points to significant failures in investor due diligence in both cases. And both faced allegations of suppressing internal dissent, discouraging employees from speaking up.
And Theranos, of course, ended with criminal convictions for Holmes and her partner. Builder.ai's legal process is just beginning, but those similarities in the pattern, the tech overpromise, the founder appeal, the investor captivation, they are quite chilling.
Absolutely. Another comparison made in the sources is to the Wirecard scandal, the German payment processor that collapsed after revealing a massive accounting hole.
Ah, yes, Wirecard.
That case involved huge accounting fraud, inflated revenues, echoing the round-tripping and overstated revenue allegations swirling around Builder.ai. And Wirecard's auditor, Ernst & Young in that case, famously missed the fraud for years. Builder.ai, as we discussed, faced questions about its own auditor independence and the rapid cycling through smaller firms.
So these cases really highlight how weak or compromised auditing and governance structures can essentially enable significant financial irregularities to go undetected, sometimes for years.
Exactly. And Builder.ai's story is also explicitly called out in the sources as just a prime example of FOMO investing, fear of missing out, and, as we talked about, AI washing.
Right, the FOMO.
That intense pressure, especially during the AI gold rush, to get into deals to not miss the next big thing. It reportedly pushed investors to maybe rush their decisions, accept really high valuations, and potentially sideline the kind of rigorous due diligence they might normally do.
And the AI washing part.
Yeah, the sources call Builder.ai a textbook example, taking human labor and deceptively packaging it as advanced AI. And they're quick to point out this wasn't unique to Builder.ai. They cite other examples where human workers were reportedly working behind the scenes for services marketed as fully automated AI. Things like certain features in QuickBooks, or even aspects of Amazon's Just Walkout stores initially.
Interesting. Any other examples of FOMO investments mentioned?
The sources also point to other examples they labeled disastrous FOMO investments, like Zymergen, a synthetic biology company where the promised technology just didn't scale as expected after they went public. Or Frank, an edtech startup acquired by JP Chase, which then faced allegations of massively inflating its user numbers.
So it seems like this pattern just keeps repeating, doesn't it, across different tech sectors?
It really does. The hype builds around a new technology or market, the FOMO kicks in among investors, due diligence perhaps gets weaker, founders feel pressure to overpromise, which can lead to misrepresentation or unsustainable business practices, until eventually reality catches up, and the whole thing can just collapse spectacularly. The specific tech might change blood testing, payments, AI, biotech, but the underlying human behaviors and market pressures seem remarkably consistent.
Which brings us to the really crucial question. What can you, listening to this, actually take away from this dramatic, complex story of Builder.ai? The sources offer some really critical lessons, don't they? For founders, for investors, for the whole tech industry.
They absolutely do. What stands out for you as the key lesson for founders?
I think for founders, the sources really emphasize that integrity has to come before hype. Building a company on a foundation of misrepresentation, whether it's about your tech capabilities or your financial health, it's just inherently unstable. It's incredibly risky.
Be realistic, right?
Exactly. Be realistic and honest about what your technology can actually do today, not just what you hope it might do someday. Don't let that marketing narrative get miles ahead of the engineering reality.
And focus on the boring stuff early, like governance,
Yes. Focus on building a sustainable business model, putting in robust financial governance, getting independent checks and balances in place early before you try to scale aggressively, and just be transparent with everyone, your employees, your customers, your investors. It seems non-negotiable.
And for investors, what's the big takeaway for them?
Well, the sources are pretty blunt. Rigorous due diligence cannot be optional. You simply have to look beyond the hype, beyond the charismatic founder's pitch.
Dig deeper.
You have to dig deeper. Conduct truly independent technical checks to verify the technology claims. Don't just take their word for it, and do equally rigorous independent financial audits. Don't just accept the numbers they present, verify them, scrutinize who their auditors are, question any rapid changes.
And resist the FOMO.
Absolutely. Actively resist that fear of missing out. Don't feel pressured to rush into a deal just because everyone else seems excited. As the sources really emphasize, you have to dig below the headlines, below the marketing hype, to find the real story.
And what about for the broader tech industry? Any lessons there?
I think the sources suggest a need for greater accountability around AI washing and any kind of misleading technology claims. The focus really needs to shift back towards building genuine, sustainable value, not just chasing height or vanity metrics like inflated unicorn valuations.
Mhm.
And as we discussed, finding better ways to protect all the stakeholders involved when startups inevitably fail, especially the employees who lose jobs and pay and the customers left stranded. Maybe through things like that software escrow idea you mentioned, or potentially stronger safety nets for employees caught in sudden insolvencies.
Makes sense. And finally, the sources provide some really practical warning signs, don't they? Things you can look for, whether you're considering working for a startup, investing in one, or just relying on one as a customer to maybe spot potential trouble before it happens.
Yeah, these seem really useful. What are some of the key ones?
Well, pay close attention to financial stress signals. Things like the company consistently delaying payments to vendors or employees, sudden mass layoffs, unexpected office closures, abrupt changes in senior leadership. Builder.ai showed a lot of these signs in its final months.
Okay, financial stress. What else?
Revenue inconsistencies. Is the company really vague about how it reports revenue?
Mm.
Are they repeatedly missing their own targets? Are they reluctant to share detailed financial metrics with investors or even senior staff? That could be a big red flag.
Technical debt is another one mentioned, right?
Yes, watch out for signs of serious technical debt, like new features being released very slowly, frequent system downtime or outages, customer support becoming slow or unresponsive. It can indicate the underlying tech isn't keeping up.
What about their place in the market?
Look at their market positioning.
Mm.
Are they overly reliant on a single major partner or platform? Do they lack clear differentiation from their competitors? Also, funding desperation can be a sign. Are they constantly trying to fundraise? Are they taking down rounds?
Down rounds meaning they're fundraising at a lower valuation than their previous round.
Exactly. Which means investors think the company is worth less now than it was before. That's often a serious indicator of underlying problems.
And one more.
Client concentration risk. Does a huge percentage of their revenue come from just one or two major customers? If so, losing just one of those customers could put the entire company in jeopardy.
So being aware of these signs, recognizing them early, it can really help you mitigate your own risks, right? Whether you're thinking about a job offer, making an investment, or choosing a critical vendor for your own business.
Absolutely. So wrapping this all up, the collapse of Builder.ai, it wasn't just one single thing going wrong, was it? It really appears from the sources to have been this complex failure, maybe even a perfect storm.
Caused by what?
A combination of factors. A highly charismatic founder, an alleged AI Mirage that misrepresented the core product, very serious allegations of financial deception, and all happening within a market environment that was just incredibly susceptible to hype and FOMO.
And the costs, both human and financial, were just immense. Hundreds of employees losing jobs, losing pay, customers facing operational chaos, and over $450 million in investment capital just gone.
Builder.ai really stands now as a stark cautionary tale, especially relevant in this intense AI era we're living through. It's a powerful reminder that while the potential of new technology is undoubtedly huge, so is the potential for deception when fundamental integrity, transparency, and rigorous oversight get compromised.
The lessons seem crystal clear, don't they? For founders, for investors, for the industry as a whole, prioritize substance over hype, demand and conduct truly rigorous due diligence, and build companies on a solid foundation of truth and sound governance.
This story really underscores the value of doing exactly what we've tried to do here.
Yeah.
Diving deep, looking beyond those polished headlines and the marketing spin to try and understand the real picture underneath.
Absolutely. And if understanding complex stories like this one, getting informed quickly, cutting through the noise to find those surprising details, if that's something you value, then subscribing to the deep dive is honestly the best way to make sure you get these essential insights delivered directly to you every time.
And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering the repeating patterns we've talked about today, echoes of Theranos, echoes of Wirecard, now Builder.ai, all these cases featuring elements of intense hype, alleged misrepresentation, significant financial or technological issues, are we just destined to keep seeing similar failures as the field of AI continues to evolve and generate enormous excitement and investment?
Or can these painful, hard-learned lessons actually lead to real change? Can they genuinely alter how companies are built, how they're funded, and how they're scrutinized in the future?
It's certainly something worth thinking about.